Hello and welcome to the first Marty's Matchbox makeovers of 2020. I had a little break over the Christmas holidays and I put Matchbox away out of my mind for probably over a week, but I'm back into it now and I'm hoping that this year will be the best year ever. Some people have been concerned by my absence because of all the Australian bushfires that are taking place at the moment. Rest assured, my family and I are safe. We live in the western suburbs of Melbourne, and although we smell smoke on a daily basis, we do not see any fire or flame anywhere near to where we live. Our thoughts do go out to all of the firefighters that are fighting these fires, and also to all those poor people who have lost their homes and livestock. So in this episode I shall be making over this Aveling Porter steamroller, which was manufactured in 1958. It's one of the first series of the Yesteryear models, and this one is number Y11. Now there's some parts missing on this one. The roof and a couple of vertical supports are missing. Also the flywheel on the left hand side. There's some corrosion on the wheels and general chipped paint from people playing with it, I guess, in the past. Overall it's in good shape. It's not distorted or particularly damaged anywhere, which is a great thing to see. So as always, I'm going to start by removing the wheels and then paint stripping the model. So to remove the wheels I'm going to use this Dremel with this rotary grinding stone in it, as per all my other videos just about. However, in this instance, there was not enough material for me to wear away using this method. I was at risk of damaging the wheels, so I opted instead just to grind down the mushroom head as close to the wheel as I could get it without damaging the wheel, and then managing to pull the wheel off of the axle end just by a bit of brute force. I did nick the paint on that left hand wheel, as you see in the center, but it's nothing that can't be fixed with a little bit of emery paper and a quick rub down, and it should look like there's no damage at all. The front wheel axle is also the same, where there's just no chance of wearing away the lip of the shaft there on the end. So once again I'm using something different this time around. The flat cutting stone, I'm using it as a flat grindstone. I'm very carefully again removing the head of that axle so that I can just pull the axle out and remove those front drums. This is the road roller, by the way. I think I said that at the beginning, didn't I? The Aveling Porter steamroller. Now I used my little spring-loaded centre punch there just to force the pin out because there was a small burr left on it, but it wasn't too difficult. I'm going to have to find replacements for that now because that's too short to reuse. Now the front drum or roller is in two halves there. I guess that this was the first Mark I version of the differential, whereby when the vehicle is turning, one wheel turns faster than the other one, and they compensate for that by having a split roller, otherwise it would be skidding around the corners. This frame here that supports the front roller, I'm leaving it into position. I could take it off, but it just means more work, and I don't actually think I need to. I can spray paint this again, and I don't think you'll know that it hasn't been removed. Now these here are hemostats. They're locking forceps and they come in really handy. If you haven't got any, I recommend you get some. They are great for painting things, and once you clip them on they seldom let go. So before painting I've got to strip the old paint off using my preferred method of the polish stripper paint stripping gel. If you splash this on your fingers it can sting a little bit. It's caustic. I guess it's caustic because it stings. So I just tip a little bit into these disposable food containers and brush it on, and although this is a little bit time consuming, I find it quite therapeutic and I really do enjoy doing it. I know other restorers use caustic soda and some others drop the model completely in a jar of paint stripper. But I actually get some fun out of this, a little bit of interaction with the model during the process of removing the paint. This model was one of the early models, as I said, came out in 1958. And I do find that these earlier models, the paint seems to resist the paint stripper somewhat, and it doesn't fall off as easily as some. And this one is no exception. So whilst I'm waiting for that paint to soften, I'm making up a matching green that I can respray the model with later on. Normally I do this before paint stripping, but I kind of forgot. So before I remove the paint, I'm just doing a double check to see if it's similar. It's close enough to my eye, so I set that aside now for when I need it. Now this paint stripper has really started to take hold now and is blistering the paint. Let's see how it comes off. This is quite a complex little model. The casting has a lot of voids on it and small areas where the paint stripper and the toothbrush is difficult to get into. So here you can see I'm going to have to do this a second time, which I don't mind. I don't mind doing it a second time. As I say, I do enjoy this stage of the restoration process. So second time round, I'm putting the lid on the container, and I'm hoping that the fumes from the paint stripper will assist in penetrating those small and hard to get to areas. Once I've removed as much paint as I possibly can, I give the parts a light brush over with this steel brush, and it's great for getting in amongst those little spokes there and getting out any tiny little bits of paint that are left behind. These wheels do have an inside and an outside. The outside rim has some rivet details on it, so I must remember that when I put this back together. Now I'm using my standard technique here, and without thinking I go straight into what is ordinarily the next part of the process, which is applying undercoat. It's only later that I realised that I needn't have undercoated the wheels as much as I did, because they're meant to be silver. Anyway, let's have a look at some of the details here. There's some pipework and rivets on the side there. A little valve or union. I'm not too sure what those two horizontal pieces at the back there, maybe a step to help the driver get in. This one's got two steam pistons in there on a offset crank, you can see. They would drive the flywheel. There you can see how the screw thread on the end of the steering column engages with the toothed gear that pulls the chains around to change the direction of travel of the vehicle. I believe you used to have to turn the steering wheel about 100 times to get 1 degree of movement. Some nice detail on the front of the boiler there too, like a hatch with 2 hinges and a locking handle. I'm just showing you again a close-up of those rivets I'm talking about. And it looks like these wheels are counterweighted there with that huge mass of metal in the centre. The front ones also have small rivets on the front drums there. So again, I have to make sure I put them back in the right order. Now this one here had a lump, a casting error, I guess you could call it, where there was actually a raised lump of metal on the rim. So I just took that down with a small hobby file and some fine emery paper. I use this cocktail stick to hold it whilst I give it another undercoat. And again, I'm still not woken up and realised I don't need to undercoat the rims. So I just stick that there in a bit of foam to dry. Now I've got to try and replace the missing flywheel. So I've designed this in SketchUp for my 3D printer. This is half width, so I made 2 of these and I glued them together back to back. It looks a bit rough, and I used plenty of body filler, and this was probably the hardest bit of the whole makeover, trying to make this flywheel look presentable. So here's one technique I was experimenting with, holding the toothpick in my drill and just spinning this thing around whilst I ran around the edges with some emery paper. And I actually had to do this maybe 3 or 4 times before I was happy with it. It looks good, it's the right scale. I'm going to keep working with this and we'll come back later and have a look at it. So here it is once I've finished sanding it, and I'm happy to say that I am now undercoated it and I'm going to paint it black. Now the flywheels came out matte black, gloss black and dark brown apparently. It's a variant, so I'm doing this one in gloss black. I'm using an image off of the internet there on my tablet to assist me with repainting this model. Now this green paint goes on beautifully. It's a mixture of Mr. Hobby and Tamiya paints, and it's a lovely colour green. I do like these old colours that these models came out in. Now using these magnetic clamps that are absolute godsend. That's so handy, I leave it there to dry. Now I get down to correcting my error and removing all of the undercoat off of the rims of the wheels. I still can't believe I did this. I guess I just wasn't thinking at the time. Anyway, they turned out really nice. That looks like brand new, that metal on there. So shiny, it's almost like it's pure silver. The secret is I finished them off with this bronze wool, and it just gives a high sheen finish to these little metal objects. It's from lustersheen.com. Now here's a roof I 3D printed. It's a bit rough on the back, but it's the top I'm worried about. So I filled that and sanded it a couple of times and undercoated it, and that's ready to be painted green and refitted. There's the flywheel being painted gloss black. Now the wheels are going to be bright post office gloss red, so I'm just going to mask off the rims of the wheels where I've just polished them up. And then I'm going to paint these red. I can't wait when you pull off the masking tape to see what's revealed. I'm sure these are going to look fantastic. Now, I must have lost some of my skills over the Christmas break, because I'm painting these bright red now, but what I didn't realise at the time is I'm using flat matte paint. I can't believe I can be so stupid sometimes, but I guess we all make mistakes from time to time. Now, I do like this method of painting these wheels, just rolling them around in my thumb and forefinger there on a cocktail stick, and just spraying away. You get great coverage on all those spokes and the tight little corners there inside the rim, and they come up looking fantastic. What I'm going to have to do, of course, is when these are finished, I'm going to give them a top coat of some varnish to try and make them look a little bit brighter. So I'm going to be using this Mr. Hobby Super Clear for a change. I do that now and set them aside to dry before I can pull off all that masking tape. Whilst they're drying, I'm going through my axle box looking for some replacement axle pins. This is a particularly long one I found, which is great. It's actually over length, so I can fit the wheels and cut it to length, and it's going to be perfect for my needs. I've also got one there for the front drum. And here I'm using a couple of pop rivet, what do they call those things, the pop rivet shanks, to make up some, or fashion some vertical supports for the roof. They're just the right size for those holes at the back, and I just persuade them into position using a few light taps from that hammer. That one was a little bit bent, so I'll just tease it out. And they're different lengths, but it doesn't matter, because I'm going to cut all three of those down. Looks like the front one there, somebody's made from a nail. But it's a little bit too long, so I'm going to level them all out off now using my cutting wheel on my Dremel. And I'm using pictures off the internet as reference to see how high this roof should sit in relation to the top of the funnel. And so long as I get the two at the back the same length as the one at the front, everything should look nice and straight and even. It's a little bit fiddly, but I think it's going to look good. Now, how do I attach that to those uprights? Well, you'll find out later. Here's the wheels, and the most exciting bit now is the removing of the masking tape. Oh, and I love that red and silver contrast there. These really are little works of art, these models, aren't they? Now, there's a little bit of overspray on the rim, which itself should be silver, the outside edge of the rim. So I'm just going to finish these off with a very light sand. And look at that, they look brand new. I'm happy with that. I'm really pleased how these wheels turned out. Now the upright posts, I've looked at some pictures. Some were green and some were black. Well, just for the purposes of making the model look a little bit more interesting, and tying it into the underside of the roof, which I painted matte black, I've decided to paint the uprights gloss black. Now here's my finished flywheel, and I've made a very small stub axle there because the hole doesn't go through the model, it only is a couple of mil deep. I'm going to glue that pin in with some Starbond medium thick super glue. I guess initially when these were made at the factory, that pin was probably hammered into position and it was probably just a force fit. Which could explain why the flywheel is missing, because if a kid played with it too much, you could understand how that little pin could come loose over time and fall out. Okay, it's starting to look a little bit better each step we get through. I'm going to put these wheels on now. I'm going to cut this axle to length first. Now where the axle goes into the body, there is a piece of metal there, tubing, that sticks out to give clearance between the inside rim of the left wheel and the flywheel, the black one there that I just fitted before. Well, I guess I made my flywheel a little bit thicker than it should be, and it interferes with that rear wheel slightly, and I'm worried that the paint's going to get worn off and it will spoil the overall effect of the model. So I had to come up with a quick fix-it. I didn't have any small washers. However, I did notice that these stirring sticks, they're quite rigid, and they actually fit quite well over that axle. So I thought if I just cut a very thin collar off the end, slip it over the axle, it should improve the clearance between the rear wheels and the flywheel. So I'll just do this as a test. I'm hoping that will be unobtrusive there. When the model's back together, no one will really notice that little black ring is on that shaft. So I'll put it back together and check for clearance, and there you can see it's not touching the flywheel, which is good. I'm going to stick with that for the time being, and who knows, in the future if I find a tiny little washer, I might go back and put it on there to make this thing a little bit more durable. Now, to refit the axles, I use these nails that are driven into a lump of wood, and they have a small cup drilled in the end of them. And I have another one in my drill chuck positioned directly above the one in the wood. And if you haven't seen this before, this is the method I use for reforming the end of axles. The secret is to take your time and not rush it. Let the tool do its job. And here you can see it has squished the end of the axle over and made it into a very slight mushroom shape, and that's what's retaining the wheel. I think I'm going to have to make myself some new nails soon, because that one got a little bit wobbly there, so I think maybe it's wearing out. Anyway, it should be good to go for the front roller at least, so I'm going to do that one now. And here is the model with the wheels back on. There's a close-up of the end of the axle that I just created using that nail and drill method, and there's the one on the back. Not too bad. Now I've got to fix this roof on. Now I could just glue it on, but I didn't think that was going to be strong enough, so I've decided I'm going to drill 3 depressions in it. Hopefully they'll be lined up with the vertical supports, and it'll form a mechanical grip as well as the glue will be a chemical sort of gluey grip. And I'm hoping that the roof will be on that securely that it won't fall off immediately somebody picks it up to look at it. So I've just cut out a piece of paper there the same size as the roof, and I'm now pressing the model upside down onto the paper to make a small impression in the paper as to where the upright posts are. So I can see the exact position of the upright posts. So I'm using this paper as a little template, and then I place the template onto the roof, the underside of the roof, and using my spring-loaded center punch again, handy little tool this, using my template I mark the underside of the roof with some indentations. So now all I have to do is drill those out just to maybe 1/2 mil deep, and hopefully this will fit back together. Now the ones at the rear actually are slightly out of position. I don't know how that worked, so a little bit of stuffing around, but I have to do it twice. I guess the old adage of measure twice, cut once, I should have done that here. Been a little bit more accurate with my placement of the holes. So I had to redo that, because all three didn't line up at the same time. It's only out by 1/4 mil. But annoying. These are slightly elongated now. But I was very surprised that with pressure, actually clicks on. And it's held on here with no glue, it's just friction. You can actually lift the model up. And this is quite a heavy little model. So I was very pleased with how that roof's going to be held on there. That and a combination of a couple of drops of super glue, and that's going to be solid. Now what makes this model special is the gold highlights that were hand painted at the time, outsourced apparently to people that worked in the factory. They'd do piecework at home in the evenings, and they'd paint these little details on. Really fiddly stuff. But these little tiny gold or brass coloured accents on this model just make this thing a charm to look at. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. And I've noticed online, whoever was painting them used to put their own little twist on them. Some you would paint bits and other people would paint different bits. So you'll see what I come up with at the end. Now, whilst we're discussing steam engines, I thought I would show you my Mammoth steam engine that I had as a boy when I was 9 years old in England. It's one of the few things I brought over from England when I emigrated to Australia. Now, Mammoth was a toy company that was founded in 1937 by Geoffrey Malins. And the name Mammoth comes from Malins Models. Well, my version of steam engine is the classic TE1A, and it's driven by water and methylated spirits. This is a pressure safety valve going in the top of the boiler there, and this at the back is just a bung for draining out the water at the end of the day. This firebox attaches with a couple of metal tabs on the back there, just simply sits there and hangs there, and that's what heats up the water in the boiler to make this thing run. Also has a feature of a whistle, and this is the, as I said, this is the TE1A model. It differs from the TE1 model in that it's got this reversing lever, so this thing can run in reverse. So as I said before, it needs water and methylated spirits and a source of ignition. And because I'm playing around with flammable liquid, I've got a dry powder fire extinguisher on standby in case things turn ugly. So first thing is you remove the rear bung and the pressure relief valve. Now actually fill it through the top hole there where the pressure relief valve goes. You're supposed to use demineralized water. Well, I don't have any. I'm just using tap water, and I think that's all I've ever used, even as a kid. You fill it up until it starts dribbling out the rear hole, and that means that the boiler is full. Then you put in the bung at the back, tighten it up, there's a little rubber O-ring on there, and check that the function of the pressure relief valve works. It's spring loaded, and just put that in finger tight. Now this is where it gets dangerous, and we used to do this as kids. Me and my mates in the kitchen at home playing with methylated spirits and matches. I tell you what a childhood we had. Not allowed to do it these days. These are actually banned due to European toy regulations. You can't use methylated spirits anymore. You have to use hexamine solid fuel blocks, or some of the newer models that are coming out, they're still making them, Mammoth. Some of the newer ones are running on butane gas, apparently. So you won't see these anywhere in the shops running on maths anymore. So now we just leave this for 5 minutes for the water in the boiler heat up. You can see there's a bit of pressure building up there. It's seeping out through the pressure relief valve there. I'll try the whistle. It's always a bit of excitement as a kid, playing with the whistle. Right, so like I said, 5 minutes later we've got steam. All you have to do is spin the flywheel to get this thing started. And look at that. Straight off the bat, this thing hasn't been started for 30 years. It just sits in the cupboard in the kitchen, and it is belting along. I don't know how many RPM that's running at. It's 300 RPM, something like that. It's just going like the clappers. Here's a nice slow motion shot there of it in action. Now that metal handle there, the reversing lever, my father made that knurled end because the original one was plastic and it got broken off. So my father was a machinist and he made that knurled end for that lever out of a bit of brass. So this thing just keeps running and running and running until it runs out of steam. If you try using the whistle too much, you can actually shut it down prematurely, and then you have to wait for it to build up pressure again. So there you have it, my Mammoth classic TE1A steam engine. I hope you enjoyed that. So now I'm gluing on the roof, as I said before. With the super glue and the fact that this thing snaps on and is held in position by friction alone, this is going to be quite a solid little roof. Now, let's have a quick reminder of what we started with today. This is the Yesteryear model Y11 Aveling Porter Steamroller from 1958. This one's been played with that much that the roof and the flywheel have been broken off and missing. A bit of corrosion on the wheels and the paint is chipped and dull. And this is what it looks like now. What a beautiful little toy Matchbox Leslie manufactured in its day. This beautiful dark green, red, the silver rims on the wheels and those gold highlights just make this model a gorgeous piece of English engineering. And I'm glad to say that this is now going to go into my collection and be preserved for other people to enjoy in the future. Such a shame that so many of these models are thrown away. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Marty's Matchbox Makeovers. There'll be more to come in 2020. So until then, I'll see you later. Goodbye.